The story of the rich man, Dives, and the poor man, Lazarus, repeats often in life. Two or more people or groups or parties or countries or whatever exist, and in hindsight, one can see that they could have approached things differently. Hindsight is so clear. Everything makes more sense when we look back. Often these days, global conflicts, local conflicts, catastrophes. We hear the siren in our own community. Or this incredible division in our country dominates the news cycle. And it becomes what we can think about. This means that the most relevant thing we can do with our text is to hold it up in light of what we see, feel, experience, everything that we bring with us. And we can try to see where God is speaking and what God is saying in this situation. As we look at the passage and as we listen for God's voice, we begin with those words of our epistle lesson that Peter read so clearly, sort of hanging over us. Look for the joy. Instead of being like Dives and missing what's right in front of us, try to see the love. Be peacemakers. Exercise patience. Be kind, generous, and faithful. Gentleness and self-control make the world a better place. And so if Dives, this rich man, can teach us anything, it's don't wait until it's too late. Work will always be there. Learn to trust. And no matter what happens, whether it's a test or a situation, whatever it is, the sun will still come up tomorrow. Each September, we try to take part of our liturgical calendar and focus on God's world and how we can care for creation. And today is the last week in this series. Yet in recent weeks, as I've tried to connect those dots between caring for creation and our passages, it's been a challenge because the news cycle seems to push even this incredibly important subject of caring for God's world to the back burner. Today, Luke 16 speaks too directly to it, though. Luke 16 comes in and addresses it. And it's okay if you heard it sung, heard it read, and didn't see what I'm talking about. That's all right. I'll try to do some of that connecting the dots in just a second here. But Luke 16 speaks to a climate-related crisis affecting us right here in Virginia. Tangier Island in the Chesapeake Bay is disappearing. Before turning to Tangier, though, we go into this passage, and here we meet these two characters, Dives and Lazarus. Dives is rich, dressed in fine linens. I always read that and think about this linen suit that I have and think, oh, golly, are you talking to me here, Luke? Dives is feasting on sumptuous food. And Lazarus, poor Lazarus, covered in sores, longing to get the scraps from the table. Luke names Lazarus, that's where we get his name, but we get the name Dives from the Latin for rich man. And throughout history, many people have just referred to Lazarus and Dives as shorthand for this story. But then in verse 22, both people die. What happens next is strange for us because we believe in a God of grace. We believe in a relationship with Jesus Christ. We believe in this eternal communion with God, and we don't believe in a works-based salvation. Both Dives and Lazarus seem to receive an eternal reward based on what they must have done here on earth. Dives goes to Hades, and this again presents a challenge for us reading this passage. Scholars going back to the 2nd century, Hippocrates, thought, is Jesus here talking about Sheol maybe? That's a Hebrew concept. In Sheol, the souls of the righteous and the unrighteous were sort of detained in a holding pattern. Not the same as the Catholic concept of purgatory, but not something we're used to. But I want to invite you to set aside this tripping hazard of Hades or Sheol or whatever Luke's talking about here. The question is, why does Dives go there? And Luke doesn't say. So asking that question doesn't really get us anywhere. If this were really a story about retribution, then Luke would have given a fuller explanation to the reason Dives deserved to be there, but Luke doesn't. It's not about Dives' punishment. That's not the point of the story. It's a story about recognizing opportunities and then taking them. It's a story about recognizing now that work will always be there, that we have opportunities to trust, and no matter what, failing a test isn't the end of the world. It's about avoiding situations where we look back and say, if I could only go back and tell Dives, let me go back, Abraham, and tell myself. No, you can't. Dives looks up from Hades or Sheol or wherever and sees Abraham and sees Lazarus at Abraham's side. And calls out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. And I hope these words sound familiar because we hear them repeated in a different context in the Gospels. They come up 7 times. But instead of Abraham, have mercy on me, it's Jesus, have mercy on me. Comes up 4 times in Matthew, once in Mark, and twice in Luke. And then we have the 3rd reference in Luke, Abraham, have mercy on me. In each case, someone cries out to Jesus and says, Jesus, have mercy on me. And what does he do? You can pick any one of the 7 examples. What does he do? What? He has mercy. He does more than that. What does he do? Heals. He heals almost in every case. It's a healing miracle. Jesus responds. He has mercy, but he meets the person where they are and he addresses their specific need. And so we see this parallel in the passage of Dives looking up, is what we sort of see grammatically, whatever that means, and saying, Abraham, have mercy on me. And we get a different answer. In this story, Dives looked back and wished he would have listened. And I thought about this story. This past summer. I read this book, Chesapeake Requiem by Earl Swift. It's a really good book. Somebody mentioned before the service when they saw the title, have you read this book? I said, yes, in fact, I have. I reached out to Earl, who I think lives in our area, and invited him to come, but he was unavailable today. I just invited him to come to hear what his book inspired. But Chesapeake Requiem is about Tangier Island and the Chesapeake Bay. And there's no way to have a conversation about Tangier without addressing climate change, the poverty of the island, and how it's going to be gone in 50 years. Tangier Island is out in sort of the middle of the bay. It's one of the last inhabited islands on the bay, and it could be the very first place in Virginia to experience climate refugees. Without action, the 400 or so residents will have to move as their island and homes disappear. In Swift's book, he talks about people who are the age of some of us here today who can remember their neighborhood being gone now. It is now just open water in the bay. And this is a climate catastrophe that is actively happening. And this loss of habitable land is a vivid reminder of how humanity, all of us, are impacting the earth. And we, people, humanity, have a choice. We can either respond to what we see, respond to the information that is in front of us, respond to the facts that scientists put out before us, or, like Dives, we can wish we had. Not we can respond or not, we can respond or wish we had. I first visited Tangier in 2014 or 15, and over the last decade, my family and I have sailed there about 10 times. Some of you have been to Tangier Island because in 2018 we took a youth mission trip there, and it's a really interesting place. I would say it's a magical place. It feels so far. It feels like another world, yet it's so close. I love going there. There's a tight, unique culture on the island. The people have a musical, interesting accent. And the restaurants on the island have some of the freshest crab cakes in the world. It's amazing. After finishing Swift's book, I thought about this series, where we would be in September, and I thought almost immediately about Luke 16. And as I was thinking about it, I started to think about rephrasing those opening lines, starting in verse 19. There was a rich land, dressed in spacious skies and amber waves of grain. And in its largest estuary was a poor island named Tangier. And here we are. According to some estimates, saving Tangier could cost between $250 and $350 million. Ironically, and I didn't know this would be the case, but on Monday of this week, NPR's Morning Edition had a story about Tangier Island, climate change, and the cost of saving it. At that cost, is saving it the right choice? I want to be so clear. That's not the question I'm asking here today. That's not the question for this space. That's not the question for where this place right here. I'm asking a question about Luke 16 and about the choices we make and what we do. And I recognize that where we are on our journey, it could end up someplace different for different people. But after finishing Earl Swift's book, I thought about this series, and I thought about this cost. And of course, as we ask the question, is it worth it, we can bring up any number of other subjects: homelessness, the cost of health care, food instability. Where's Jackie? Wonderful job stepping in at the last minute. I really appreciate the way you shared about the City of Promise. But there's so many needs, and we talk about this in finance, so many different needs. So I don't have any recommendation about Tangier. I hold this up in light of the gospel story about Dives and Lazarus and ask the question Jesus implied at the end of our reading. What proclamation about God's kingdom are we missing today? What is God saying to us that we may be thinking, I don't know if I'm hearing that right, or that's not really a question? In the future, what will we look back and wish we had known? Or what will we look back and wish we had recognized? Our epistle lesson today includes the fruits of the Spirit, and we should know them all. They should roll off our tongue, because we then can not only hold up everything in the light of the gospel, but in the light of those fruits of the Spirit and how we live, how we interact, even taking any of them. But love, for example. Caring for God's creation is an act of love, because we're caring for people that we may never see, meet, or know. That is an act of love. Gentleness and a spirit of gentleness implies that we have less of an impact. It goes on and on. And in the parable, Jesus doesn't say why Lazarus was at Abraham's side. As the story unfolds, Lazarus really doesn't have much of a role, or in fact, he doesn't have any agency. He lives, he is poor, he has sores, he's hungry, and he dies. And then he goes to Abraham's side. In life, no one is Lazarus. And nowhere does Jesus call us to be like Lazarus. Each one of us, has agency. We have the ability to make choices. And the parable is about when we know the right thing to do and ignore it. Once the sea rises and waves overtake Tangier Island, it's too late to save it. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus, though, isn't about that. It isn't a requiem for the bay. It's about the things we can save before it's too late. God calls us to action. And each of us can take one step today to follow that action. And it can be different for different folks. Might mean walking when we could drive, or might mean making sure we remember our reusable bags when we go to the store. We all know the million things to do to care for God's world. There are lists and lists of them. But responding is when we know something to do and do it. Don't let the future you wish you would have listened to something today. Amen.